In the quiet town of Willow Creek, where white picket fences lined every street and the scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air, no one could have imagined the darkness hiding beneath such perfection. The brutal murder of Emily Sanders wasn't just a crime. It was a storm that shattered the illusion of a peaceful community. At the center of this tragedy were two couples, Ethan and Grace Whitmore, and Liam and Emily Sanders. From the outside, they were the picture of suburban success. Ethan was a renowned architect, admired for his innovative designs and magnetic personality. His wife, Grace, was a beloved third-grade teacher, known for her warmth and kindness. Together, they lived in a charming craftsman home on Oak Ridge Lane. Surrounded by meticulously tended rose gardens Grace took great pride in. Liam and Emily Sanders had moved to Willow Creek 5 years earlier. Liam, a successful financial advisor, was the life of every neighborhood gathering, always quick with a joke and a smile. Emily, with her striking beauty and effortless charm, became the center of attention wherever she went. Her confidence drew people in, but it was her sincerity that made them stay. Their friendship started innocently enough: weekend barbecues, holiday parties, the occasional double date. But one autumn night, over too many glasses of wine and a crackling fireplace, the conversation took a dangerous turn. An idea was floated, one that would forever change their lives: a consensual arrangement of wife-swapping. What began as a half-joking fantasy quickly evolved into a serious discussion. Curiosity replaced hesitation, and within weeks, rules were established. It would be an exciting escape, a way to reignite the passion in their marriages while keeping everything controlled and respectful. The first night it happened was awkward, a whirlwind of nervous laughter and hesitant touches. But by morning, something had shifted. They convinced themselves it was harmless fun, just an unconventional way to explore their desires. At first, it worked. Their marriages seemed stronger, their social lives more vibrant. The arrangement remained their tightly kept secret, locked away behind closed doors and whispered conversations during late-night gatherings. But what none of them realized was that beneath the surface, something dangerous was brewing, especially within Ethan Whitmore. His fascination with Emily had started as harmless attraction, but slowly, it grew into something far more consuming. He began to think about her constantly, craving her attention in ways that went beyond their arrangement. Grace noticed the changes first: the way Ethan's eyes lingered too long on Emily, how he found reasons to visit the Sanders home even when it wasn't planned. She confronted him one night after a neighborhood dinner, her voice trembling as she asked if there was something more between him and Emily. Ethan had dismissed her concerns, laughing them off as jealousy, but Grace knew her husband too well, and what terrified her most wasn't just that he was infatuated with another woman. It was the way he seemed to be slipping further away from the man she once knew. The arrangement that once brought excitement was now unraveling into something dangerous. Ethan's thoughts of Emily weren't just fantasies anymore. They became plans to see her alone, plans to somehow win her away from Liam. He started volunteering for errands that involved the Sanders family. Simple things: dropping off garden supplies Grace had borrowed, offering to help Emily set up for a charity event, even showing up at the local yoga studio Emily frequented. At first, his presence felt coincidental, but soon, Emily couldn't ignore the deliberate nature of his appearances. Grace, too, was no longer able to brush off the growing unease. One night, while Ethan was supposedly working late, she drove past his office and found it dark. Panic gripped her chest. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she tried to convince herself there was a reasonable explanation. But deep down, she knew exactly where he was. Across town, Ethan stood outside the Sanders home, staring at the soft glow coming from the living room. Emily was inside, curled up on the couch, reading. He watched her silhouette, his mind a storm of desire and resentment. He convinced himself that she felt the same way, that this connection between them wasn't just in his head. The next day, Emily confronted Ethan. She cornered him outside the local cafe, her voice low but firm. "Ethan, this has to stop," she told him, her eyes filled with equal parts pity and frustration. "Whatever this is, it's over. It was never supposed to be anything more than what we agreed." But Ethan didn't hear her words. He only saw the way her lips trembled, the way her eyes held back tears. In his mind, those were signs of hidden feelings, of a woman trapped in a marriage she no longer wanted. Emily's rejection should have been the end. Instead, it was the spark that lit a fire Ethan could no longer control. He became more brazen. He showed up at her workplace under the pretense of discussing community events. He left small gifts on her porch, flowers, books he remembered her mentioning, even handwritten notes confessing his feelings. Emily tried to handle it quietly, not wanting to alarm Liam or cause a scandal in their close-knit neighborhood. But as the weeks passed, her discomfort turned to fear. And then came the weekend trip to Lake Crescent. The two couples had planned it months ago, back when things still felt thrilling and harmless. Now, the thought of spending a weekend under the same roof terrified Emily. But she went anyway, hoping it might help put an end to the madness. It didn't. The tension at the cabin was unbearable. Ethan monopolized Emily's time, insisting she join him for long walks along the lake. Leaving Liam and Grace behind, his conversations grew more personal, his touches more possessive. One night, by the fire, Ethan whispered words that sent chills down Emily's spine. "What if we left all of this behind?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Just the two of us. Start over somewhere new." Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden deck. Her heart pounded in her chest as she mumbled a quick goodnight and escaped to her room. What she didn't know was that Grace had overheard everything. That night, lying awake next to her husband, Grace stared into the dark, knowing the man she had loved for over a decade was slipping further and further into a dangerous abyss, and she was powerless to stop him. The morning after that dreadful night at the cabin, a thick tension hung in the air. Breakfast was a strained affair, clinking cutlery, forced small talk, and long silences. Ethan barely touched his food, his eyes flickering constantly toward Emily, who couldn't seem to sit still. Grace sat rigidly, her mind reeling with the memory of Ethan's whispered proposal by the fire. Later that day, back at home in Willow Creek, Emily made a decision. She would end this, once and for all. Whatever fragile balance they thought they had was gone. The line had been crossed, and there was no returning to how things were. That evening, while Liam was away on a business trip, the doorbell rang. Emily's stomach twisted as she approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw him. Ethan. His face was pale, his eyes hollow but burning with desperate intensity. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. "Ethan, you can't be here," she said firmly, keeping her hand tight on the doorframe. "Please, Emily," he begged, his voice hoarse. Just hear me out, one last time." Reluctantly, and only out of fear that refusing might escalate things further, she let him in. They sat in the living room, the room feeling impossibly small under the weight of everything unsaid. Ethan's voice trembled as he confessed his feelings, how he couldn't stop thinking about her, how he believed they were meant to be together. He spoke of running away, starting a new life, as if it were the most logical solution. But for Emily, this was the final straw. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "This ends now. Whatever this was, it's over. You need to respect my marriage and my life. If you don't stop, I will have no choice but to call the police." For a moment, Ethan sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling. Then, something shifted in his eyes, a coldness, a dangerous edge. But before things could spiral, he stood abruptly and left, slamming the door behind him. Emily's knees gave out as she collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. She felt trapped, helpless, like a hunted animal in her own home. That night, she made a call she'd been avoiding. She dialed Grace's number, her voice shaking as she explained everything: Ethan's obsession, the unwanted visits, the gifts, and now this terrifying confrontation. On the other end of the line, Grace sat in stunned silence, though she had long suspected the depth of her husband's obsession. Hearing it from Emily's own mouth shattered her. "I'll talk to him," Grace promised, though her voice sounded as unsure as she felt. But it was already too late. The next day, Ethan's behavior became more erratic. He sat alone for hours, staring blankly at the walls of his study. His mind played Emily's rejection over and over, like a cruel, unending loop. And in the darkness of his obsession, a monstrous idea began to take shape. If he couldn't have her, no one would. The final thread of Ethan's sanity snapped on a cold, clear Thursday night. The streets of Willow Creek lay silent under the pale light of the moon, the kind of night where even the air felt still, as if holding its breath before something terrible happened. Ethan stood outside the Sanders home once again. This time, he wasn't there to talk. He wasn't there to plead. In his pocket, his fingers curled tightly around the cold steel of a kitchen knife. He knew Liam was out of town. He had checked. He had waited for this moment. The thought had burned in his mind for days. And now, he was ready to act. With disturbing calmness, Ethan slipped through a side gate and quietly forced open a window. He moved like a shadow through the darkened house, his footsteps silent against the hardwood floors. Upstairs, Emily slept soundly, unaware that death had already entered her home. Her breathing was soft, her body curled under the covers. For a fleeting second, standing over her, Ethan felt something: remorse, hesitation, a desperate wish that things had turned out differently. But that moment passed. His mind drowned out everything except the belief that this was the only way. His trembling hand gripped the knife tighter, and with a single violent motion, he drove the blade into Emily's chest. Her eyes shot open, a strangled cry escaping her lips, but it was too late. Ethan pressed his hand over her mouth, silencing her final screams as life drained from her eyes. When it was over, he stood over her body, his chest heaving, his mind a storm of regret and perverse satisfaction. He had destroyed the one thing he claimed to love most. Covered in blood, he fled the house and returned home. Grace was waiting, her face pale as a sheet when she saw him walk through the door. She knew instantly what he had done. And in that horrific moment, instead of calling the police, instead of screaming in horror, Grace helped him. Her mind went into survival mode. She dragged him to the bathroom, ordered him to strip off his blood-soaked clothes, and scrubbed his skin raw under scalding water. She gathered the clothes, stuffed them into a plastic bag, and set to work cleaning the faint blood smears from the floor. Grace moved with terrifying efficiency. Her mind calculated every detail: how to cover up the timeline, how to create an alibi, how to erase every trace of his crime. That night, under the cover of darkness, Grace drove miles out of town to a secluded area and burned the blood-stained clothes along with the murder weapon. Flames licked high into the night sky as she stood there, watching the evidence of their sins turn to ash. Back in Willow Creek, the peaceful facade of the neighborhood remained, but within the Whitmore household, the weight of what they had done settled over them like a crushing, inescapable darkness. Days turned into weeks, and though the police investigation pressed on, there were no immediate arrests. Grace had done her part with chilling precision. Their alibi held strong. When questioned, she insisted Ethan had spent the entire night with her, a seemingly grieving wife standing by her distraught husband. But no matter how carefully they crafted their public image, the weight of their crime grew heavier each day. Ethan unraveled quickly, haunted by vivid nightmares and hallucinations. He barely slept. In his waking hours, he drowned himself in alcohol, each glass of whiskey numbing the guilt for only a moment before it came rushing back, stronger than before. Grace tried to hold the facade together. She organized community events, volunteered at the local school, and kept up appearances. But behind closed doors, she was falling apart. Every knock at the door made her heart race. Every police car passing by made her stomach churn. And then the rumors began. Neighbors noticed Ethan's erratic behavior, his distant, hollow-eyed stares, his increasing dependence on alcohol, his unsteady hands. Whispers swirled through the community. The perfect couple wasn't so perfect anymore. Detective Rachel Monroe had been watching all of this unfold, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for reading people like open books. She saw through the Whitmores' carefully constructed lies. She noticed every nervous glance, every trembling voice, every inconsistency in their stories, but she also knew how to wait, to apply pressure just enough to make the cracks widen. The break came when a neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived across from the Sanders for over 20 years, came forward. She remembered seeing Ethan's car parked near the Sanders house on the night of Emily's death, not just once, but twice, and she remembered how pale and shaken he looked when he drove away just before midnight. It wasn't concrete proof, but it was enough for Detective Monroe to secure a search warrant. When the police searched the Whitmore residence, they found traces of blood in the floorboards beneath the bathroom tile, remnants of burned fabric buried deep in the ashes of their backyard fire pit. The evidence was overwhelming, and just like that, the walls came crashing down. Ethan was arrested first. He cracked within hours of interrogation, his fragile mind unable to withstand the relentless pressure. Through tears and shaking hands, he confessed to everything: the obsession, the confrontation, the murder, and then he did something Grace never expected. He told them about her role, how she had cleaned the blood, destroyed the evidence, created the alibi. Grace was arrested that same evening. In the end, the trial was a media sensation. Willow Creek became the center of a story that captivated the entire nation. Ethan Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Grace, despite her attempts to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, was found guilty of being an accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Her once spotless reputation couldn't save her. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. As for Liam Sanders, the man who lost everything, he moved away from Willow Creek, The house that once held his dreams became a monument to his worst nightmare, and though justice had been served, his heart remained irreparably broken. In the haunting aftermath of Willow Creek's darkest tragedy lies a sobering truth. There are lines in life that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Temptation, when left unchecked, breeds obsession, and unchecked obsession can lead even the most ordinary people down a path of irreversible destruction. This story is not just about a crime of passion, it's about the quiet, often invisible moments when people choose to ignore their inner compass. It's in the small justifications. It's harmless. It's exciting. No one will get hurt that dangerous roads are paved, and by the time the consequences appear, it's already too late. In life, the most critical decisions often happen in moments of weakness, when we're tempted to cross personal boundaries for short-lived excitement or fleeting pleasure. But every choice carries weight. Every decision plants a seed that will eventually bear fruit, good or bad. If there's one lesson to take from this story, it's that protecting the integrity of our relationships and honoring the commitments we make are not just moral obligations, they are safeguards against regret and tragedy. Sometimes, the most courageous act is simply to say no when it's hardest, to choose long-term peace over temporary thrill, and to recognize that true freedom doesn't come from indulging every desire, but from mastering them.